who wrote A Line in the Sand. We're going to have an interview with, and then we're going to have a talk with Professor Adnan. And between this week's been really funny. We've had reports that, oh my gosh, the state was rigged not in Camilla's favor. We've had Steve Bannon at CPAC doing the Hitler salute. Shapiro is apparently the big news on that. He turns on Trump over Ukraine. And we have Jeff Bezos has bought James Bond, so now he has a license to kill James Bond. Luigi's back in court, and one of the odd things to happen was Alyssa Grimes did Elon's baby mother for a couple of his kids. There's a series of now deleted posts on X. Grimes responded to a post of Elon by writing, "Please respond about our child's medical crisis. I am sorry to do this publicly, but it is no longer acceptable to ignore this situation." Perhaps the saddest thing is he was over at CPAC.
We've got one more surprise in case this wasn't enough. I'm going to let Elon do it. Who else is here?
Well, President Milei has a gift for me.
Javier Milei from Argentina. You guys know who that is, right?
Thank you. This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy. Chainsaw!
I'm pretty sure that was an electric chainsaw. Just saying, but I don't want to talk about any of that to start. The main thing that's been on my mind with all the controversy this week between Canada and the US is the fact there was a hockey game played, and Canada was victorious, which I don't know, as a Canadian, I appreciate.
Yeah.
And
3-2.
The biggest thing about that too is it just had the right political spice, animosity, and pettiness that you need in games. It was a heck of a thing, and I do have a short video. So you guys who aren't into sports, don't worry, it's short.
And he calls to rev them up, and we go into your building and we bend you guys over. No spit, no lube, sandpaper finish. And to have McJesus cap it all off, the torch has been passed. Nobody could question anymore. Can McDavid win the big one? He did win the big one. I'm so proud of those fucking guys. Cooper, the whole staff, way to go.
Yeah, the reason why there was no lube is tariffs. It was too expensive. I thought that was kind of neat. You see the passion in them, and that was actually Whitney's Spittin' Chicklets podcast, and he used to play for the Edmonton Oilers.
There you go.
So that was kind of cool. So we have Miles Spencer, who wrote the book A Line in the Sand, and we're going to have a conversation with him, and we're going to talk. Since it's been such a hard week, we're going to shift our attention to the Arabian Peninsula. Hi, Miles. How are you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing great tonight, Walter. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, hey, let me start off with the question that everybody probably asked you about, and I know I did before. Why did you write this book, A Line in the Sand? And what is your affinity with Arabia, my blue-eyed friend?
Well,
or do you have blue eyes? I don't.
Yeah, I don't have blue eyes at all. I got blue behind me.
I was thinking of a blue-eyed cheek. So
Lawrence had T.E. Lawrence had blue eyes, but I do not. So after 9/11, I was trying desperately to get my hands around who, what, where, when. I'm just a curious guy from Western Pennsylvania, and I would always ask those kind of questions. I just couldn't get any answers on that one. And I finally came upon a book, Seven Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence. That's the same as Lawrence of Arabia. He's a much better writer, frankly, than Peter O'Toole was an actor, I think. And I concluded at the time that I thought that was the best Western interpretation of, I'm going to call it the Bedouin culture, right? That's Pan, Arabia, Levant, etc. But let's just say the nomadic Bedouin people that he pulled together, created a revolt, partnered with the Allies, the British. Well, thought he partnered with the British, and got to Damascus, right? So that was the best explanation I had seen. And a very good friend, Wells Jones, who's retired Navy ex Special Forces parachute rescue. So bad dude, right? Good dude, but bad dude. Uh,
Does he
he was
play
reading the
hockey
same.
though?
That's right. No, he never did. He was reading the same book, and we looked at each other and we had the same conclusions. We said, like, all right, so what do we do now? Let's go. So we were able to trek 1,100 miles through the deserts of Saudi, Jordan, and Syria. We back in the day wrote about it. That would be the equivalent of a blog today, but wasn't quite a blog back then. Got the attention of some folks in Saudi, ended up working for the royal family there for a couple of years. And then we sat on it. Actually, we had a contract, still do, with a Broadway producer to produce a play, and that particular play kind of went off to the left. Not in a political way, but the story became centered around the Paris Peace Conference and a hotel room called the Majestic, where Lawrence and Gertrude Bell and Faisal and some others were basically cutting up the Middle East, but the guys in Versailles didn't really listen to them. So we watched the play go that way. October 7th happened. Wells and I looked at each other and said, we have a different story. We can have two bites of the apple here. And we put the book out within, look, you can write a book in 6 months if you think about it for 15 years. And that's what we did. So it's been out for about a year, and it warms my heart actually. It's often bestseller for the week in Saudi, Jordan, and Syria history. It is a historical fiction, so the history is real, but there's some fictional elements because it's based on our trek, and as they say, based on a true story.
You had quite a bit of dialogue in there. Did that dialogue come from your guys' conversation during your trek?
Yeah, I would say people ask this question a lot.
I know.
99% of the things that are in the book happened to us. I will add that there is time travel in the book, and there's a time travel device, and that's what makes it historical fiction, as far as you know.
Yeah, yeah, you never know what's real, right? Yeah, that's true. So, well, let's just face it, Arabia didn't have countries. It was carved up, right? In that peninsula and everything. And how do how do people find themselves? Like, do they identify as Palestinian or do they or as Omans or Arabians? Because as far as I know, Israel before the European Jewish settler came in, everybody seemed to get along. Am I wrong or am I right?
So my
Maybe other
take on
people,
it
but
is, yeah, absolutely. Well, you're absolutely right. There were no lines in the sand until the men in clubs in London and Paris decide there ought to be, right? So a lot of these Bedouin tribes, including the Jews, including the Arabs, including a lot of other smaller tribes within that, all kind of got along very well. And as a matter of fact, there's a chapter in the book that Wells and I experienced ourselves. We're in a archaeological dig called Maghar al-Shayb. It's in the northwest corner of Saudi Arabia, not far from Jordan. And all our guides was named Ali, by the way, all of them. But this particular Ali is going on about the story about how in this site, Ibrahim was here and Hagar was here and Israel was here. And like, not for nothing. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. I'm a God-fearing Christian. And those are my prophets and those are my stories. Where did you get them? So it's in the Quran. Like, so you're telling me that the prophets of the Bible and the locations of the Bible are all the same with the Quran? Yeah, many of them are. So we called a friend in Tel Aviv immediately, Ami, and said, like, hey, I'm going to read you 12 prophets. You tell me how many you got in the Torah. We went 12 for 12.
Hmm.
What it taught me, number one, was how ignorant I was growing up as just a Christian in Western Pennsylvania. It's a lot of other people in the world, but we share many of the same stories and the same values and the same prophets. We ain't that different. There are some very small differences, which, from a religious point of view, people tend to magnify for the benefit of discord, and they're very effective at that. But our experience was uh, no one's particularly waving the flag for one religion or another, or one country or another. The territories were drawn by somebody else. No one gives a shit.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to spend some time in Palestine or in Gaza at all?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
So,
what were your impressions there, if I can ask?
well, one of the five things that we bring up in the last page of the book, spoiler alert, is people have to live somewhere, right? And you have these displaced people that we actually were on the Jordanian side of the west of the wall, um, just outside of Jerusalem, just on the eastern side of Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, Banksy likes to paint there. Interestingly, yeah, he's got some of his best graffiti is on
He,
that side of the
he is
wall,
just the best artist, ain't he?
right? And nobody knows this, right? Because who would report on it? But
Well,
it's
he's in
there. You can
Ukraine.
see, yeah,
Yeah.
you can see it. You can see it. Um, and so uh, the hardship is just difficult to move through and move past. One thing we experienced was just anecdotally, you drive through a town, let's call it Hebron or whatever, anything on that side. And um, the settlers' homes all have water cisterns and electricity.
So you're saying the West Bank, they all have water and
I'm not going to say all, never say never, never say
right.
always. Just my experience was that that uh, the settlements that we visited,
Mhm.
uh, and look, this is not. I mean, it looks kind of like campsite, at least the ones that we visited. But this campsite's been going on for 20, 30, 40 years.
Right.
Right. I'm all for camping, but not for a generation.
Okay. Well, I got a question. You could answer it or not. You were there before the October 6th. You were traipsing around the countryside.
Well
And then
before, yeah.
after you heard about the war between Israel and Hamas, how did that make you feel? Because you were seeing the real people who were there who were affected. I would imagine it was the people that you had met, you would have some feeling for. So, just in essence, what did you think about what was happening?
Well, again, I didn't experience it directly. I was there beforehand,
Yes.
and,
Yeah.
and I thought it was pretty bad. But I have not been there since. So I imagine it's worse. I feel on a personal basis, every grandmother should have the right to hug their grandchildren. And if you think about that for a second, what does it take for that to happen? Takes a lot of different things than what has happened, right?
Mhm.
Like, look, are there bad apples everywhere? Sure. In this particular case, the retribution just roughly might be 2,000 dead and murdered on October 7th, 1,200, 1,500, something like that.
Yeah, we can only go by the newspapers, right? So,
Yeah. And I'm going to go with 50,000 before the starvation and malnutrition hits on
mhm,
the other side. So that might be 100. Look, I mean, that part of the world's always been an eye for an eye,
mhm,
but doesn't quite seem symmetrical.
yeah.
Um, Having said that, look, the Abraham Accords were about to be signed, right?
Mhm,
Um, and that would have left an odd man out, Tehran. And so I think this was last ditch effort to say, not so quick.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, they've paid dearly for it.
Yeah. Well, judging from what you said at the start, that you found that the profits seem to be all the same, and the people, and there's only a small difference between religions, brother against brother, animosity out there. I don't know. Somebody could probably correct me. I think, Anne, you had a question for Miles. If anybody
Hey,
has a question for Miles and his great book, which has a 4.7 rating on Goodreads and Amazon, which you can purchase, by all means. Sorry, Anne, you go ahead.
oh yeah. Hi, Miles. It's been an interesting read. Only just got a copy. I find it. I was curious whether you've gotten any feelers for optioning it for a motion picture of some kind, because it has that kind of sense of adventure and particularly the idea of shifting time. And although I don't know how you're going to get those menus into a movie, but uh,
Food's an important part of the story, that's for sure. Go ahead.
oh no, I just found it really. It had all that sort of sense of an interesting buddy-like interplay and conversation. I appreciated that, and I thought that would make part of the good film. And then the shifts into the multiple histories, the interlocking histories, the divisions and all that sort of stuff. Uh, I did find it kind of weird. Well, it's weird. It was just interesting to get to that recipe at the at the end of a chapter. I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. Is that an audience thing or whatever? Anyway,
I'm a chef, and one of the things we experienced there was that so often when we were negotiating something or needed something or had, needed some help, etc., there was always something on the brazier cooking nearby, right?
I see.
And we couldn't have it until we conceded to the terms, right?
Oh, there
And
you go.
the only time we ever got our food served right away was at a Fuddruckers restaurant outside of Mecca, right? Everywhere else, it was part of the negotiation process. So we just felt, only fair play to put some of the recipes in there that I continue to make since I've come there. And the food is tremendous. We've not had it optioned as of today. We do know some folks in Hollywood that certainly had the capability to do that if and when they choose. Spoiler alert: we have just completed a second book, and it follows the same colonial bad boys behaving poorly around the world. This one happens to be set in Cuba, and it's called Havana Familia. So these are all based on experiences that we've had ourselves. And so that'll be the next adventure of Magnus and Finn. That'll be out in the spring. So perhaps when there's three of them or four or five, it'll be worth it for somebody to option it. But that, describing the colors and the temperature and the feel and the taste, and we felt that was so important because, look, this was written for a Western audience, right? This was written for like my dad, who's since passed, but he would read something like this and, excuse my French, you would say, "Holy shit, I did not know that." And that was the mark of really communicating something that
Yes.
that was like Stranger in a Strange Land. The Western mind would have never known that, and no Western toes have ever walked in that desert. So, uh, aside from employees for Aramco or U.S. military. So,
Yeah.
hey,
Thanks.
sure thing.
So I was going to ask if you got a sequel coming out. So happy to hear that one's coming out. When do you think it'll be published, my friend?
It'll be March, same route on Amazon. It's already in pre-sale, and it is called Havana Familia, spelled with a G, the Italian way, because, as you probably know, Havana, not only did the Spanish fight over it and the Americans fight over it and the Russians fight over it, it was also the mob fighting over it as well. So,
Moida, what Moida? Yeah. Italian mafia. That's right. Are there any other questions? Adnan, do you have a comment to say or a question for Miles?
I don't. I've just been listening avidly, and on my favorite bookstore's website to order the book. Sounds like a lot of fun.
Right.
Thank you, Adnan. Yeah, I've seen the chat blowing up. I can't keep up with it, but yeah, happy to answer any questions now or later or whatever you like.
Well, Miles, if I was to buy it, apparently I got to pay 25% more. Are you going to give me a rebate?
Yeah, well, we could talk about we could talk about that for sure. Yeah. To be honest, I'm a huge fan of the Audible, which was read by Eduardo Ballerini. He's a fantastic orator. It's the same words, and I hardly recognize them. He says it's so much better than I did in writing and Wells did in writing. I see a question about the Hajj in Mecca. So if I may, the question
Oh yeah,
was,
go ahead.
did you see the Hajj in Mecca? So our sponsor there, eventually, I mentioned we worked there for a couple of years after our first visit, and it's a man that continues to be very active today. Um, and he's probably, top handful in MBS's entourage at this point. He was the governor of Jeddah, also Mecca and Medina, and a province called Asir. And so, he pulled some weight. His chief of staff was big with the photography and the helicopter. So we got to do, chopper flyby. And there's a particular road on the way out to, I'm going to get it wrong. I want to say Haifa, but that's Tel Aviv. Um, uh, uh, I'm going to look it up. No, I'm going to look it up here. But on the way there, Taif, sorry, Taif. So on the way to Taif, there's a place where you can actually get a decent view as well. And we just stopped at a Fuddruckers, but that's as close as I got to the Hush.
Okay. I think Adnan's got a question.
Yeah, I just wondered, since you were talking about delicious food and that you are a chef, I wondered if you might tell us, and that your book contains recipes as well. This is great. Um, what was the dish that um, most blew your mind and was not something that everyone would be able to find, at their grocery store or even their local Middle Eastern kebab shop? But tell us about some aspect of the cuisine that just was very revelatory and really exciting for you as a
Sure,
chef.
I'm going to give a double answer there because when you qualified it with not available otherwise, this is something you can get in a good French Levant store, right?
Mm.
So we're in Damascus after 26 days. Uh, like a shower, a bed with linens on it, like all these, incredible things. And we go downstairs, breakfast time, and we have the most delightful croissants. Those are easy to find. Beautiful hand churned butter. That's easy to find. Rose petal jam.
Yeah.
And I tried it. I said, Wells, you got to try this. He goes, I don't need jam. It's like, no, this you got to try. And to be honest, we went through like half a dozen croissants a piece, a tub of butter, and all of the rose petal jam. We just, it was absolutely divine. The other thing that you probably don't always get around here would be probably mansaf, right? Which, you can make it at home, right? But you're probably not going to order it at your local takeout. And that we had several of those meals, but the one that I remember was after 5 or 6 days on a Can 1 Wadi rum, saddle sores, the whole bit, just totally exhausted. And Ali, our guide, another Ali, says, we're going to prepare a feast for you. And we learned this lesson because my partner Wells, we sat around in a circle, all the men, right? And he seemed to make a move for the center of the goat with his left hand. Bedouins universally use their left hand for one thing.
Rookie mistake on his part. Rookie mistake. You gotta know, no left-handed grabs at the meat.
Wait, I'm left-handed. What would I do?
Tough it out, man. Well, you'll be very clean down there if that's what you'll do. But you'll have to struggle with your right hand to get your food.
There's no other questions. Miles, I want to thank you very much for coming, and especially on short notice. I thought you would this would be good, especially we're going to talk to Adnan, Professor Adnan, right away. And I
had one
appreciate.
question, Walter.
Well, you know,
If you don't mind.
Sorry,
I didn't get my hand up in time.
Yeah. Okay, so say your question.
Yeah. So, is my mic okay? I don't
Yes,
know if
you're
too
fine.
loud. All right. Okay.
Miles,
so-
this is Carander Joe. Just so you know.
Oman, but this is the first time I've returned in 20 years to the Middle East. One thing that has been sticking out in my mind is how much of a slob I feel walking around in my Western garb. And did you have a similar experience as you were moving through spaces throughout the various countries about the palatial feel in space and the garb people wore?
Well, I'll answer that a few ways. First of all, for the most part, well, we were in local kit. So we kind of wanted to live the way they lived and feel the way they feel. We're not in disguise. We're clearly Americans, but when we were out in the desert, we kind of look like everybody else with lighter skin. But as to the vastness, like there are a couple places where that really hit me. One would obviously the desert of Wadi Rum and El Hul, which is the northern border of Saudi Arabia. It's an amazing straight line which somebody drew for 865 miles. But the vastness of that place is unbelievable. Also, the vastness of we went to a castle, a Crusader castle that Lawrence loved called Crac Chevalier. It's in Homs. It's north of Damascus. Not a lot of foot traffic these days on the tourist market, I'll tell you that. No coincidence that the Knights Templar built castles in places like that. You could see the Mediterranean. You could see all the way down the Bekaa Valley. You could see, you basically could see nobody could sneak up on you back in those days, and kind of felt like it was 1,000 years ago. Thanks for your question.
And it's A Line in the Sand by Miles Spencer and Wells Jones. And a sequel coming out to it. It's very well received, and people should go get it and buy it. And Miles, again, thank you so much. You know what? Are you planning a trip back?
We are. We got a lot of travel ahead, but we're planning on going to the Congo, Belgian Congo, in the next year, and so
should I send you a few maple leaf stuff so you could put on your backpack?
Sure.
Just saying. I mean, I'm not saying. Miles, thank you so much for this. I appreciate it. And you could stick around and join the conversation, or if you have something to do, I appreciate it. But
I will hang around in the background. Thank you. I look forward to listening to Adnan. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much. And we'll bring in
Thanks,
Professor
Miles.
Adnan Hussein now.
Oh, I'm doing really well, Walter. It's great to be back.
Well, hey, I was going to ask, you're looking good too. I like the beard. It's playoff ready, so I appreciate that. I was going to ask you, because you're an American teaching in Canada, and maybe you could give us a short bio here in a second, but do you got a go bag ready?
Yeah, well,
Because I hear we're going to have to maybe bring Americans, if it gets worse, into drag them over to the Politeness Center.
yes.
And, you'll be
Well,
interned. But
clearly North America has become too toxic to handle. I think everybody needs a go bag if they can get out.
Right.
It used
That's
to
why
be
you
you
need a
could
good
just,
hockey game. You just get it all out, right? You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
all of that.
Well, I mean, I think it was pretty exciting in times right now politically. We've got elections going on in Canada. You've got in the province of Ontario, federally, there's going to be elections, and it all might be for naught because we'll just get absorbed. You know. Um, and the other funny part of it is that you've got a Trumper, in Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, busy, talking tough and trying to exploit Canadian nationalism. When he's on record having basically the same kind of agenda, having said in the past that he really supports Trump and thinks it's really good for America, and now he's exploiting it against these. Tariffs and so on to call an early election. So it's interesting the way Canadian nationalism functions.
Yeah, yeah, it's in the background and then something spikes it up, right? Because
Yeah,
mainly quiet and but we can be as petty as the rest of them.
for sure.
So
But I was going to say also for Miles, like, I don't know if the gear that Walter may send you with the Maple Leafs and some Tim Hortons, which by the way is now owned by the Americans, but
yeah,
that's maybe a metaphor for the larger condition, I think, maybe.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think the Canadian gear works as well anymore in the rest of the world because Canada has aligned itself so thoroughly and closely with US priorities and policies in foreign affairs that it may have undermined kind of that historic difference that people respected and recognized about Canada, that they were the peacekeepers, peacekeeping nation and all of that. We haven't been really identified with that for a long time. So,
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure if you had a maple leaf on your jacket or something or your hat, somebody would in Europe would come over and give you a pat and say, "We're sorry."
yeah, maybe.
Could
Probably true.
could you give us a
Probably.
short bio and also your podcast? So you're also the host of the Gorilla podcast,
Guerrilla history. That's right. Yeah,
History.
guerrilla
Yeah,
history.
that's right. But you're teaching up in Canada.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, was born and raised in the United States, grew up all over the place, but mostly in California, which is where I did most of my, you know, I did my high school and college and university education. So I lived the longest in California, although now I've lived longer in Canada. So my first, job was in New York City at NYU for a few years. My wife, who I met in New York City and was teaching at Columbia University, got a job at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. We didn't know about it, but I got to know the town, the city, small city, really well. It's in a gorgeous location. Right where Lake Ontario feeds into the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, which of course is a famous river going all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, and is for much of its span is a border between the United States, like upstate New York and so on, between the U.S. and Canada. So I live very close to the border, and in this kind of nice location. I came and joined her after a few years and have been teaching at Queen's University in the history department for, I guess, almost, well, now I guess this year is 20 years.
Oh,
So yeah,
congratulations.
yeah.
Awesome.
So
All
anyway,
right.
as I was saying, in terms of bio, family, my parents met in the States, but they're both immigrants. They came as college students and met in Philadelphia, city of brotherly love, but turned out to be uh, not brotherly, but marital love. So um, they were. My mother came from Turkey, but her family originally is from Central Asia, in an area that's a mixed region of Uzbeks and Tajiks and Kazakhs in the Fergana Valley, which is the silk growing heartland and on
Mm.
the Silk Route. But her family during the late 20s, early 30s, they were silk farmers, and so they were being collectivized, and they decided to escape. They went to Afghanistan, where she was born, and eventually emigrated to Turkey. So she was educated there, and the family became Turkified. They all think of themselves as Turks, but they have this Central Asian history. And she came as a foreign exchange student to the United States in the 60s. And my dad is from grew up in Pakistan, but was born in India. And when he was 2 years old, partition happened, on the subcontinent, when the British Empire gave the subcontinent its independence, but it did so in a way that divided it into, at the time, two parts, but it became three. Um, when there was East and West Pakistan, a
Hmm.
crazy idea. But so my father, anyway, grew up there, and he came to the United States also, and they met in Philadelphia. And so that's kind of the story of how I and my family have been in North America.
Well, I
My sister.
appreciate that, Adnan. I actually did not know all of
Yeah.
that, so I appreciate the history of your family. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
well, I think of it as an interesting history, not just because it's how I locate myself, but because two of these very major world historical events kind of forced them, into
yeah,
migration. One was Soviet collectivization, was a major change in Central Asia and agriculture on the Eurasian continent. I mean, the big sort of change. And then, of course, the largest movement of peoples that took place, actually, that essentially the population swap and transfer that happened because of the division of the subcontinent into creating a kind of religious state, which is a sort of strange thing to think of,
yeah,
that like they decided, well, we need the Muslims in one place, and we need the Hindus and the, can be in a different place. And of course, what it did is it stranded what is today 150 million people
yeah.
who are Muslims in India, but they've been delegitimized in some ways because the creation of Pakistan and Bangladesh, the rationale for it says, well, you really belong there, you don't belong here. And so um, these are kind of big changes that happened in the 20th century. And
Also,
so I think of these as important historical events for the world
hmm.
that I happen to have a family kind of connection to. It's how we ended up where we are.
Yeah. Okay, you've got guerrilla history with Harry or Henry.
Henry Hakamaki, who should be known to some people from way back in the days of the David Feldman show during the COVID pandemic and the office hours, where he's an former immunobiology student who I guess was a listener of the show, made himself known to David, and gave these updates on research and answered questions with another mysterious figure. What was his name again? The government researcher in a
Irritable immunologist.
yeah, the irritable immunologist. Yeah. And so I got to know Henry through that. Through the show, the David Feldman show, and we ended up with Brett O'Shea from Revolutionary Left Radio and the Red Menace podcasts doing a new podcast called Guerrilla History. We've been doing that for about 4 years. Brett returned to just doing his shows. He got too busy, so Henry and I have been doing it together for the last couple of years without Brett. And I used to have a podcast called the Mudgeless Podcast. To have that, it was a little less regular than I wanted it to be, but it was associated with work I was doing at the university for a kind of Middle East, Islamic world sort of project there. But when Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, was invited as part of her tour through various Canadian venues, universities, visits to Ottawa to talk with people in the government, um, who all canceled their meetings with her. By the way, these had been arranged months in advance, but the foreign minister, the prime minister, other legislators representing the liberal government that will probably be soon voted out, we have to say, but decided to cancel arrangements that had been made to meet with this UN rapporteur to talk about the situation, about international law, to try and encourage Canada to live up to its obligations under international law as a signatory of many of these conventions, like the Genocide Conventions and others. Came to Queen's, and we were lucky. Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario is not the biggest of universities, and nor is Kingston a major metropolis, but it's on the way between from Ottawa to Toronto. And so we managed to arrange a stopover on a Friday morning, not the most auspicious of time, and we're given a tiny room that didn't meet the demand. But we held a session. But when I attempted to record it, so that with the permission of the speaker and the organizers, so that we could air it on the Majlis, which is a Queen's University sponsored podcast project, they said, if you record, then we will cancel the event on the day while I was setting up. And so it's just one minor example in a whole lot of examples of the way in which academic freedom, freedom of speech, political, organizing, education, let's just say, on this issue has been suppressed and forestalled and under, various kinds of sanction. I decided at that point that I wanted to take this independent. I also decided I would like to establish it as a YouTube show so that there would be video. I'd never done video before. And just to be able to expand what we used to do on the Majlis and not be under any constraint. So I've started a new show. It's just, I couldn't come up with a title, and I was encouraged by Sina Rahmani, who is a great Canadian podcaster, who has The East as a podcast, and he's the producer for Red Nation podcast on Indigenous affairs, and also is the producer for Makdisi Street. Some of you may have heard of that. It's three professors from Lebanon. They've become pretty popular. He produces those. He encouraged me to start a show, and he said, just call it after your name. So it's just called the Adnan Hussein Show. It's my own tie-in to David Feldman, the David Feldman Show. I couldn't come up with a more exciting or interesting name, but I've started it. We've had 5 episodes. It's on YouTube. You can also listen on the usual podcast platforms just as audio. We had one most recently on the history of Iran as a background to talking about some of the contemporary relations. We had another one with some professors from Hong Kong about China and BRICS and the new global order. So anyway, I think it's going to be fun and it's going to be interesting. And what I'm hoping to do is, in addition to these kinds of interviews, also do some of my own kind of commentary, sort of video commentary, and publish them in written form and in video form, but also to do some live streams, because I really miss, I have to say, I really, really miss the kind of interaction that we've had, since those Zoom office hour days during the pandemic, and that you've been continuing here. Incredible schedule that you've got. Of having some interaction, questions, answers, discussion, and all of that. So I wanted to do it on YouTube and do some live streams and some live stream panels. So there's going to be a lot of that sort of stuff happening.
I actually think you should do that, Adnan, because you're a good-looking man and you should be seen. I'm just saying. I mean, that's a good beard. I like that.
I thought I had a face for radio, but I guess it's a niche look, but it looks like, Walter, you appreciate that niche.
I do.
Well, we'll have another pandemic, so We'll be there
eventually,
for bird flu.
yeah, well, I mean, I have to say those were pretty intense times, I mean, we were all stuck in our homes. We had no outlet for social engagement, for information, um, and good discussion. And I think it really helped, I can say from my perspective, my mental health to be able to have an articulate, engaged, informed, and very funny. And I don't just mean, the actual professional comedian, but all the commentators, a very funny kind of community. I mean, the chat was like a lifeline. It was just so wonderful to be trading barbs and witticisms and trying to catch references, and all the witty things people were saying in the chat. And it was such a lifeline. I really missed that experience. And so I
Well,
thought I'd like to do something that would have a little more interaction than just putting out an audio podcast.
sure.
And
And if you ever had time, I'm sure the professors can be rounded up again to have a discussion on something, That would be quite
absolutely.
interesting to see. I
Yeah,
would
I
like to
think
see that.
yeah, I think that kind of panel discussion would be fun. I think
That's right.
people enjoyed having like different views and voices, and I think that's exciting. So I'm definitely gonna look to do something more like that.
Okay. So that's the Adnan Hussein Show on
Yeah, that's
YouTube.
right. It's on YouTube. Yeah.
Okay.
And also, as I said, the audio podcasts. Yeah.
All
I
right.
had a one question. I know it's just in the beginning, but have you noticed a difference in feedback from having the video show versus the regular podcast audio?
Well, I did get a couple of comments. They're like, "Wow, I finally know what you look like." So I guess for some people it may have been more jarring than it was, Walter's very encouraging, but for others it was, I didn't know you looked like that. Um, but what I liked is that there were comments, I mean, I could read comments, and that was great. People had some suggestions for
Mhm.
like other show topics that they wanted, and this is exactly what I wanted.
So that you're taking those live then?
Well, I mean, I haven't done it
Or,
so far, but I'm hoping to at
mm,
least do, once every 2 weeks a live stream.
oh, cool.
Um, yeah, yeah, and like, plan it in advance, get a few panelists, advertise it so, that there can be a community of people, and do a lot more kind of
Cool.
question and answer and panel discussion rather than just sort of one topic interview with a guest sort of thing.
Hopefully, because we're going to go to Ann Lee after you here.
Okay.
What are your thoughts about the Palestine, Gaza, Israel situation? You must have some,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
assuming.
Yeah, a lot, and I mean, I've done a lot of episodes on it too.
Is
So
it on your current YouTube?
yeah, I mean, there's one on the YouTube, and of course, there's tons on Guerrilla History that we've done. Interesting, like just before this, I was on the American Philosophical Association Central Division. They've got regional affiliates and they hold conferences. And so there was the Central Division's annual conference for the American Philosophical Association, had a panel discussion with me, Henry, and Brett about historical documents of the PLO, a book that Iskra Books put out that is a collection of translated documents over the course of from 1964 to the 80s, of various declarations, statements, interviews, constitutional documents, charters, and even a historical essay that the PLO produced. And it's called, a subtitle, A Collection for Critical Organizational Study. So it's not
Uh,
just like an inert, collection of documents, but meant to be something that you could use to talk about how anti-colonial resistance movements developed and what you might learn from them and so on. We
I
just
think
had a discussion about this book at the American Philosophical Association.
would it be fair
Um,
to assume a subtitle might have been a bibliography of Yasser Arafat?
No, actually, I don't think
Really?
he features very prominently at all. I mean, in
Cool.
this, of course, he was an important figure and a leader. But some most of the interviews are with people like Abu Iyad, who is kind of one of the kind of key Palestinian resistance leaders in the late 60s, early 70s before his assassination. There's a couple other. Really, what it is are documents that were produced by the Palestine Research Center, which existed until 1983 in Beirut, and had like 50 or 60, people working there, doing research, writing reports, kind of trying to outline political questions, look at geopolitics, document Palestinian, history and experience. And, so it was like this very activist research group that produced quite a lot of information, as well as, of course, these more important political charter type documents. And, that's a movement in which that had broad roots. And so, in fact, actually, I'm trying to think. I can't remember if there was anything that I came across in here that was really about Yasser Arafat or in his voice, and I can't really recall anything. So I think that's one interesting thing about it is to see how much this was part of when it was successful. It was successful because it actually was a broad-based grassroots organization in some respects. Now, it's
Mhm.
true that particularly after the sort of disastrous decisions, first, in Jordan, Black September, and then, of course, in the Lebanon War, where the PLO ended up evacuating and going to Tunisia in exile. That during that period, I would say there was a real disjuncture between PLO leadership and actual grassroots resistance. And of course, that's what happened when the Intifada broke out. The first Intifada in the late 80s was a popular movement and really had nothing to do whatsoever with decisions of leadership. And in fact, you could say that the 1988 resolution, declaration of principles by the PLO, and then subsequently, just a few years after that, the start of Madrid round of negotiations that were the precursor to the Oslo Agreement in 1990, what was it, 1993, that in fact, actually, that was the time when there was a restoration of this kind of authoritarian leadership of PLO figures who were out in Tunisia that actually derailed the popular resistance, and really was their route back into relevance. So it's actually a very kind of interesting, history. Yeah. So, at any rate, when it comes to the question today, I mean, I think, uh, you know, people have been following this for 15 months. So, what's there to say that hasn't been said about what has been going on for 15, 16 months? But I think the thing to think about now is how much the rhetoric of Donald Trump that people are paying a lot of attention to, will relate to actual conditions on the ground. He arranged a ceasefire by pushing for it. But he has these other kinds of plans and ideas about the future of Gaza. But I think what we has been proven over the last 15 months is that that can't be accomplished without the consent of the Palestinian people who have, defended their right to remain on the land. It's not like it's Trump's idea to kind of remove the people of Gaza. That was originally the idea. With the invasion, there were attempts by Anthony Blinken and the Biden administration to have Egypt and Jordan take, Palestinians from Gaza and resettle them. Mostly there was the hope that they could be resettled into kind of temporary camps in the Sinai Peninsula. And That didn't happen for two reasons. One is that the surrounding neighboring countries wouldn't accept it, and it would be a real red line and destabilize their own governments. So that couldn't really be accomplished, and them remain in the U.S. camp as allies. And the second thing that happened is that the people just would not be defeated. I mean, in the sense that, like, you could destroy their homes, you could kill them, but they wouldn't leave, they wouldn't be defeated, they would survive. And of course, they're facing horrific conditions now in this reconstruction period. As I think Miles was mentioning, we don't know how many people are going to die from the effects of a year or more of close to starvation, of very low calorie, poor diets, the lack of basic public health conditions that are really terrible without proper sanitation, disposal of sewage, etc. These things are all, of course, having devastating effects on the population at large, and the numbers of people who will die in the sort of excess death kind of calculations when conditions like this are imposed on them is really, going to be horrific and terrible. But regardless of the suffering of the people, what has been proven is that there isn't a military solution to attempting to remove them.
That's true. But the one thing you shouldn't do is wear a vest that says press.
Oh yeah.
Just saying.
And maybe and maybe don't travel in an ambulance either.
Yeah.
Oh, Christ.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Adnan, thank you so much. This has been
you.
wonderful seeing you again and listening. And we're going to bring in Professor Ann here in a second.
Thanks so much.
And so that's the Adnan Hussein Show, just like the Johnny Carson Show, the Adnan Hussein Show on YouTube.
Mine is funnier, I believe me.
Yeah. Thank you, my friend. Take care.
Hiyo.
Hiya, Professor Ann Lee. What you got for us today?
Well, speaking of colonialism, Trump is still trying to get Ukraine to sign off on giving up 50% of its mineral resources. It is Tim Snyder, the historian, the Yale historian, made a comment about that today in his blog, that essentially what in trying to force Ukraine to give up rights to its own mineral resources as the precondition to a peace settlement. It is just, aside from all the lies and disinformation and gaslighting, and it's just insane. And it's this weird kind of real estate approach to, well, it's the whole Trumpian, attitude that the world is simply like doing real estate deals. And so that's kind of where we are. If I were going to do a rant, it would be about that. The Institute for the Study of War has done a whole page on this specific disinformation campaign today, where they've trying to leverage Zelensky into signing off on this, and it's this kind of circus act where they've got what's his name, Kellogg, sort of smooth talking Zelensky saying one thing, and then you've got Waltz and these other turkeys, Rubio, et cetera, trying to do something else in terms of the negotiation. And I mean, the whole premise of the United States and Russia, trying to squeeze out Europe, exclude Zelensky. It's just it's interesting, but incredibly sort of dated kind of power politics. I mean, it simply doesn't understand what's going on. But we're still in the midst of that. I mean, and we're, of course, the first month of of Trumpism. Still got another 2 months of craziness. So that's what's been happening. I mean, there's some takeaways from it. That I think that'll come more to light in the next couple of days. There's nothing. The problem, of course, of Trump, or what's his real name? Krasnov. There's a thing that just came out on the web that that apparently they they found or somebody revealed a former KGB agent revealed the code name for Trump, and I think it's Krasnov. I mean, he's been a Russian agent since the 1980s, and that
Yeah.
was his code name. And so I think hopefully we'll have a little bit of a spin on that for the next week or so, or maybe longer. Um, I mean, other than that, his shtick is to sort of say, well, all these lies, a million people have died, the U.S. should get all this stuff back, and of course the key one, just because Trump was pissed off, was that you know Zelensky's a dictator, right? A dictator because they haven't had an election. Well, it's it's full mobilization. There's a damn war going on. You don't have elections in the middle of in the middle of total war and a full mobilization. I mean, and yes, it is martial law, but I mean, you have to have martial law in order to
Mhm.
win the war.
Well, I
Um,
don't think you'd get Putin's number at 90% or 95% or whatever Putin wins at. So,
oh yeah, I mean, well, there is polling, and and Zelensky has a higher approval rate than Trump. That's probably the one thing that annoys Trump. 57 to what, 46, although there's a big dip in Trump popularity these days. There's some polling on that, and he's sort of in bad shape. I think CNN referred to it as being underwater this morning. I don't really think it is, but that's kind of what happened there.
what are your thoughts on, like, especially Fox News? I think it was Mark Levin. I don't know if you got a.
Oh yeah, Mark Levin. Some people, well, I think there's a brand of Republican or right-wing folks who are, pro-Ukrainian for a variety of reasons, and they sort of look at the history, see that all of the problematic elements, and sort of ignore, the all the disinformation and
Mhm.
propaganda. I mean, there is a history there, and I think the EU is sort of a little bit better on that side of it. And of course, Putin is just Putin. I mean, he's doing essentially the same type of Soviet negotiating tactics. There's no war. Um, Ukraine doesn't exist. All of those things that are, you know, just deny everything. And of course, I don't think anyone's really asked him, why is it that you have, standing orders for all Ukrainian prisoners to be executed, to be
Mhm.
killed?
Mhm.
This is,
He also agreed not to attack the Ukrainian energy centers, the power production, and he just came in, was it last night, bombing a whole bunch of electricity power plants.
yeah, there's going to be tit for tat in that particular instance, because the Ukrainians are actually pretty good producers of drones themselves, and they've attacked sites up to about 1,200 kilometers across the border. So, and they've knocked out a quarter of oil refineries. So, I mean, all they have to do is actually hit the Kursk nuclear power plant to wipe out a huge amount of the Russian grid. And also, they've shown that they can attack Moscow, so that's there too.
Well,
Um,
Russians have shown that they can attack Chernobyl nuclear plant, right?
Well, Jesus,
Yeah.
I just insane, you know, to I mean, maybe it was a mistake, but they don't even admit that they did it. So that's even more insane from a disinformation point of view, because you've got photos of the damn missile, the hole in the
Mhm.
the damn place. So yeah, well, that's all happening. The Europeans are Trump will claim a victory because the EU or the NATO countries are putting up more money or devoting a larger percentage of their defense budget um, to NATO activities. Uh, but in fact, they're just preparing for some other stupid thing that may happen. That is, Russia moving into the Baltics. Um, I think currently they're based their nuclear weapons based in Belarus, so that's a whole nother problem.
Mm.
And they're still trying to whack all the communication lines across the Baltic. There's a thing today in Sweden. I think somebody was trying to near Gotland or something. They were trying to knock out the telecom cables. So it's going to get worse before it gets any better. And then, of course, we've got the German election coming up, which I think will be interesting. We'll be able to see whether it's going rightward at all. The polling shows that I don't think it's going to happen at all. They never polled that high, but that's a possibility.
With
So
with Elon and the American government putting their fingers on the scale there, I mean that's kind of unprecedented, isn't it?
yeah, it is.
With
No, it
JD
is.
Vance and
It is. I mean, to literally go out there and endorse AFD, et cetera. I mean, I think that AFD, is going to win some representation, but I don't think it's only. I don't think they're going to win anything. I think that generally the Germans are, it's still weighed heavily against the neo-Nazis, despite all this pro AFD stuff that's going on, and people like Elon making Roman salutes everywhere. So anyway, oh, and yeah, I forgot to ask Adnan about. I didn't Elon go to Queen's University before he transferred to Penn? I can't remember, but
He
so.
did. He only did a year, and he's never given a dime to Queens. They really
Yeah,
would
that's what I was
love
gonna.
him to.
I was gonna ask about that, whether it was worth any, you know, money to Queens to at least.
I think we should revoke his passport because he's got a Canadian passport as well. So
There you go. There you go. I don't know. I mean, there's plenty that we can talk about. Aside from chainsaws, Nazi salutes, uh, crazy presidents of Argentina. It's just I didn't realize I'd forgotten that CPAC is this week, so there's going to be a lot of that idiocy as well. Undoubtedly, Trump will make an appearance, or JD Vance's appearance was really weird. I mean, it like deer in the headlights. There's really very bizarre stuff going on in there.
can I
But
ask you what your thoughts of Bolsonaro are and his attempted poisoning of Lula?
I don't know that much about it, other than there's a lot of hanky panky, and more is coming up about coup attempts, etc. So don't know that much about.
I,
I mean, I think Bolsonaro will probably try to make a return, but I don't think that's going to happen.
they all do, don't they? All these guys.
Well, it's they just re-up. It's a retcon. They well in where is it in the case of Poroshenko? I don't know if you probably know a lot more about Poroshenko than I do,
A little bit.
but Poroshenko, he's just waiting in the wings there. I think
In
there's a
Ukraine,
kind
yeah.
of thing.
Anyways, Poroshenko actually came out after Trump said the things he said about Zelensky, and he says Zelensky has his support, right? Even though Zelensky, he's got Poroshenko under investigation for corruption and bribery.
Well, I mean, he's an oligarch. I mean, he's more of a member of the club than Zelensky is. So, that's, I mean, I think Poroshenko's always waiting until some, disaster occurs and Zelensky gets, whacked on, he'll be the guy, right? He'll be probably the pretender
And
to the
I think Lukashenko is up for re-election too again, right?
Lukashenko. Yeah, yes, that's right.
In
But
Belarus.
yeah, but I think that I guess they've successfully suppressed all opposition, or else they've all gone underground, right? Because I
Right.
thought that, that last time that well, I don't think that they were sufficiently prepared to do that, to take over to seize back the government. But
Especially with the Russian army camped in Belarus now as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
So
yeah.
let's get to the crux of the matter there, Anne. Is Trump going to run again in 2028? Is he going to get permission from Congress? What's up?
Well, we're getting close to Twilight Zone, so it's the same deal. It is the Twilight Zone. There's a congressperson who is a representative who's promoting the idea of a third term, and they're trying to get it. All the Trumpists will have a groundswell towards it, but that it will be the Twilight Zone at that moment.